Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my backyard in Los Angeles, California. How's everybody doing today? I hope you're well. I hope you're happy, healthy, and having fun. Today in Critter Chat, we're going to talk about a very delicate looking animal that is pretty unique in how it lives, where it lives, and kind of just how it exists. Today we're going to talk about an animal called the Gerenuk. Gerenuk is a very weird word. It is a Somali word that means giraffe-necked. And if you look at these animals, their neck is very long, like a giraffe. And that's where they got their name. And Somalia is one of the countries where they live. They live in a couple of countries surrounding Somalia, namely Ethiopia and Djibouti to the west, and further south in Kenya and Tanzania. That area of Africa is called the Horn of Africa, and it is a very hot and dry area. And if you look at a Gerenuk, it looks like it is well suited for a hot and dry area for many good reasons. First of all, their bodies are tan colored. That helps them blend in with their surroundings. The soil where they live is pretty sandy, and it's also pretty hot and dry. And so even the vegetation kind of has that yellowish or brownish kind of coloring. So they can blend in pretty easy with the low-lying bushes and trees that live in that area. They also have a white belly. That's going to help keep them a little cooler in the hot temperatures. White around their eyes and in their ears helps them to recognize each other quickly, but also helps keep them a little cool and helps deflect some of the glare they may see. With their long necks and very long legs, they have a very interesting way of eating. Most animals that are kind of their size and shape, specifically kind of their cousin species, the gazelles, typically eat grass and usually spend most of their time with their head down, kind of eating the grass down off the ground. Not so for a Gerenuk. Gerenuk eat trees. They eat the leaves in trees, and they can do so in a very unique way. They can stand on their hind legs and reach up into the trees and actually pull down branches with those longer, skinny front legs. So they're capable of reaching about 8 feet into the trees to find food, giving them a huge advantage of many of the other animals in their surroundings. The only things that can really eat higher into a tree that would eat leaves would be elephants and giraffes. But they can, with that ability to stand on their hind legs and pull branches down with their front legs, they can outreach any of the other antelope species. Now, they also have very small heads and huge ears and very big eyes compared to the size of their head. We've talked a little bit before about when a feature on their body is super big, that usually means it's very important to that animal. So the very large ears and also the big eyes really are important to some of their main senses. Sense of hearing, sense of vision, are super important, as well as their sense of smell. They have a pretty well-developed nose, although their nose is not super huge. They also have very small hooves. If you look at their body is kind of decent size, and then their neck's super long, but skinny. Their legs are super long and also skinny. Little tiny hooves down on the bottom. Only the males of this species grow horns. The photos I posted earlier, I believe, were all females. One of them might have a male in it. I will post a photo of a male later on today so you can see some with the horns. The horns are decent size, usually over a foot in length, kind of like the 1.5 foot range, never longer than that. But the males mostly use their horns for sparring with each other. Males are typically kind of solitary, living on their own, and fighting off other males for breeding rights. With Gerenuk, they're about 3 feet high at the shoulder to maybe 3.5 feet, so they're pretty low to the ground, Their body kind of comes up to about this level, maybe a little higher on a big male. And then with their head, it brings their head up to about here. And when they stand up on their hind legs, their head's about here, and their feet are even higher than that, pulling those branches down. They're a very picky eater, which is kind of odd for an animal that lives in a hot and kind of semi-arid, dry area. But they love to eat the leaves off of trees, particularly members of the acacia family. They are experts at finding good growth on those trees, and so they kind of live in like a scrubby woodland area with sparse vegetation. They don't live in an open grassland. They don't really live in a true desert, but they live desert adjacent. So the area next to deserts, they get a little more rainfall. They typically live in small groups of females with their young. Like I said, the males are mostly solitary and territorial. And this is where their sense of smell comes into play. That's how they communicate their territory boundaries. Like a lot of animals we've talked about, they use their pee and their poop to kind of mark their territory. But Gerenuk also have something different, and it's not totally unique to them, but I think this is the first time I've talked about it in a critter chat. They have a little gland on their face in front of their eye. It's called a pre-orbital gland, or pre-eye socket gland. And in that gland, it's kind of a little indentation in their face, and it has a little black substance that kind of is secreted out of that almost looks like a little bit of asphalt or tar. And they will rub that on the little sticks and bushes of their territory. And it leaves a very particular smell that the other Gerenuk can sense, and they'll know that that is an occupied space. So the way they get that little scent gland out onto the sticks and bushes is they kind of rub their muzzle, their face, up against those sticks. And it often looks like they're trying to poke their eye out with a stick. It's a little bit of an odd behavior, but it's not uncommon for animals kind of their similar size and smaller in the African area. Many different antelope have an orbital gland, so a gland around the eye that they use for scent marking. Their senses are very important for them, their sense of smell, hearing, and eyesight, because in Africa, almost everything that eats other animals will try to eat a Gerenuk. So they have to watch out for lions, leopards, cheetahs, hyenas, African wild dogs, and also the smaller carnivores, things like jackals, caracals, servals, some eagles. When they go to get a drink out of the water, they have to watch out for crocodiles. There's even some snakes, a rock python, that would definitely go after baby or Gerenuk that would be sitting down or sleeping or injured. So they would have a lot of different things that could try to eat them. So they are mostly active during the daytime when they can watch for those predators and listen for those predators. That's where those ears come in. They really are very attuned to any new sounds that they hear. And with their body coloration, and also their long legs and necks, they can kind of move behind a bush and blend in pretty quickly. So they kind of first try to hide rather than run. They're not the fastest of runners. They're certainly faster than we are as people, but they're not going to be as fast as like an impala or other gazelle type looking animal. Because where they live, there's more bushes and trees around. They're not kind of out in the open. So their better defense is to kind of maneuver around bushes and try to evade predators that way. Gerenuk, after they breed, the mom is pregnant for about 5 to 6 months, her gestation period. When the babies are born, they're about this big. They're super cute. They can usually stand within an hour and walk within their first day. But the moms in the wild typically will leave the babies. They kind of hide them under some bushes, and the mom goes off and eats, and then she'll come back every so often, every couple of hours, and feed the baby, but leave the baby kind of stashed away until the baby's about 2 weeks old, and then it will kind of start following its mom. Baby Gerenuk stay with their mom typically till they're at least a year old, maybe a little longer. And once they're a couple months old, they'll start eating some bushes, some leaves, but they'll also still be nursing as well. They're considered mature at about 2 years old, and then they can live up to about 10, maybe 12 years old. In zoos, there's been a couple that have made it into the mid-teens, but it's a little bit more rare. They live a little longer in zoos because they don't have to worry about predators and disease and stuff. But yeah, they're not super long-lived animals. In their wild population across those 5 countries, their population is decreasing. It's decreased about 25% in the last 15 years. They are listed as near threatened, but as they get reassessed by the organization that says whether an animal's endangered or not, they will most likely be moved to vulnerable on the next assessment. They were last assessed in 2016, so it's been 4 years since they were last looked at. In the wild, they face a number of threats. In many parts of their range, they are hunted for food for people. People in many of those countries are fairly poor and just trying to make ends meet, trying to provide for their family. So a Gerenuk is a source of food. They weigh between 65 and 110 pounds, so they're not small, but they're not big. But they would definitely be some good protein for people. They're not hunted commercially for anything, but they are hunted for people trying to eat. Their bigger threat is habitat loss. In many of their areas, the little trees that they live off of are getting cut down and used for firewood by people for cooking. And in some areas, they're being outcompeted by livestock, especially goats. Goats will eat just about everything. And in some areas of their range, there's been a lot of drought in recent years, as well as the competition from livestock that really limits the food available for the Gerenuk. And in several of the countries where they live, they have had political issues. Specifically, there's been some wars in Somalia that sometimes spills over into the other countries. And whenever there's a war going on, the wild animals usually suffer because there's people out there with guns running around who may be hungry themselves, who may find things for target practice. Wars are never good for people or animals, so it takes a toll on them for sure. My experiences with Gerenuk are really amazing. They're one of the animals that I gained very quick appreciation for to watch them eat by standing on their hind legs. I had read about it, I had seen photos of it, but when I saw it for the first time by myself with my real eyes, I was pretty impressed with their ability to eat out of the trees. The first time I believe I saw Gerenuk was at the Phoenix Zoo. We had them there. They weren't there when I started working at that zoo, but they came in a couple years later, and it was really fun to watch them. A Gerenuk was the first animal I ever saw give birth, and it was at the Phoenix Zoo, which was pretty incredible. There was a pretty good sized crowd of about 50 or 60 of us that watched the birth process right there on exhibit. We saw the baby be born and then stand up and start nursing within about 20-30 minutes. So it was super meaningful to watch that process of life happen live and in living color. During my visit to Africa in 2010, I was in Kenya. The main areas I was in Kenya, I went to 3 different places, and 2 of those places are a little too high in elevation and a little too cold at night and during the raining season for Gerenuk to live. So they were not super common during my time in Kenya, but one of the places I visited, they were common. And that was a national park that's kind of in northern Kenya called Samburu National Park. That's one of the places that Gerenuk are doing the best. And Samburu is a really big ecosystem of kind of lower land, so it's a little hotter, a little drier, That is what Gerenuk like. And through there's a big river, so there's some decent rainfall that happens, and the bushes and trees are similar to what we see right here by me. These are orange trees, but acacia trees kind of grow about the same size, and the Gerenuk really like them. It was fun to see them in Kenya. As we drove through, we would see one or two, and then we would stop and watch, and we would suddenly realize that we only saw one or two, but there would maybe be like 10 or 12 there because they blend in really well with their surroundings. With the safari truck, they were usually a little hesitant at first, but when they realized we weren't trying to chase them, they were pretty cool to just stick around. With the other animals that we saw in that area, we saw some giraffe, we saw some elephant, and we saw some baboons. The Gerenuk didn't really care about any of those and just kind of continued their day eating some of the leaves off the trees. During my time at the Los Angeles Zoo, when I was a zookeeper, Gerenuk were one of the first animals that I was trained to work with. And during my time as a keeper, they were an animal I worked with quite often, and I really enjoyed my time working with them. It was interesting because even in Los Angeles, we had to be very mindful about temperatures being too cold for them, particularly during the winter months in LA. So December, January, February, and if it was rainy and cool, cloudy, that could be too cold for them. So if it was below 60 degrees, they stayed inside in their barn where they had some heat and where they could stay dry. So even in zoos, we had to be pretty cautious about that. And because of that reason, they are not found in a lot of zoos in the United States, typically found more in the western US or southern states where the temperatures are a little warmer and where they don't have to worry about cold temperatures or heavy rains as much. Despite their significantly delicate looking little bodies, they are capable of defending themselves quite well. As a zookeeper, I didn't witness that firsthand, but I witnessed it secondhand. During my time at the Phoenix Zoo, the first two Gerenuk that we had were males who lived on our big savanna exhibit with the giraffe. And when it came time for their medical checkup, one of the keepers went in to try to help catch them so that the vets could do their medical exam. And the Gerenuk did not want to be catched very well. And these were kind of like 3-year-old males who had been running in this large exhibit for about a year. They were super muscular in the prime of their life, and they beat up that keeper pretty bad with their horns and with their hooves, to the point that she did have to go visit the doctor. She was okay, she was fine, no lasting damage, but definitely surprised everyone that the Gerenuk could defend themselves so well against a zookeeper. That was in a big exhibit where they didn't interact with people very often, so they were a little hesitant when they were trying to get caught up. During my time in Los Angeles, when I was training to be a zookeeper, one of my first days there, they were catching up the Gerenuk to give them some vaccinations, and I was asked to stand outside the barn and not let anybody in or anybody out, and kind of man the door as they were giving the Gerenuk their vaccinations. And one of the keepers who was working with them came out of the barn, and she asked me how it was, and I didn't quite understand, and she said, "I got kicked in my leg. Can you tell me how bad the wound is?" And I looked down, and on her lower leg, on her calf, where the Gerenuk had kicked her, it had cut the back of her calf muscle open, and the skin had rolled back to where I could see a large portion of her leg, and that was simply done by one little kick by a little tiny but very sharp hoof. Those experiences helped teach me as a new zookeeper that you have to be very careful around all animals, even the little delicate looking dainty ones. Can cause significant damage and harm. If they feel threatened or scared, they will defend themselves, And even though they look little fragile things, they're capable of doing some damage and some harm, capable of defending themselves. Now, that doesn't mean that they always survive if a predator comes after them. All animals have some kind of defenses, but Gerenuk certainly can get away from a predator on occasion, but do often get eaten as well. I hope you've enjoyed what I've shared with you about Gerenuk today. They are an absolutely beautiful animal. I will say this, they're little heads with great big ears, great big eyes, and a very well-developed nose. That doesn't leave a lot of room in the head for other things, so they may not be the smartest of animals. I'm not saying that they're the dumbest animal I ever worked with, but they certainly were on the lower end. Not the most smart, but they were still super cute. During my time in LA, I did see several babies get born, and was able to work with their growing herd of Gerenuk, and I really enjoyed my time doing that. I'll be sharing some more information about Gerenuk on the Facebook page later today, so feel free to check that out. And as always, be happy, be healthy, be safe. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.